Welcome back to Twist of Fate, where you can find your inspiration as a small business leader, entrepreneur, or aspiring listener that's thinking about starting a business. Today's episode is dedicated to our founders, the individuals that take a risk to solve a unique problem in the world in a unique and innovative way. But what a lot of people don't appreciate is that the well-being of our founders is a topic of discussion with a very special friend of mine. I'm really proud to introduce all of you to a client and one of my inspirations out there as a founder and entrepreneur that is making change in a positive, sustainable way. Sandeep Rao, my friend, the founder and CEO of Founders Wellbeing. Welcome to Twist of Fate.
Thank you, Doug. Really appreciate you having me on here, and I'm super excited.
Now, Sandeep, this is another one of those special international episodes for us. You're calling in from Sydney, Australia, correct?
That's right.
From my perspective, as a founder myself, I think a lot of people look at entrepreneurism as being glamorous, exciting, maybe even escapism from the mundane repetition of a long, let's say, career. But I think something that's underappreciated, it comes with challenges, it comes with stresses, it comes with pressures, both financially, economically, and physiologically, mentally. So could you share with our listeners, like, what is it that you're doing now with Founders Wellbeing?
Sure. You started off by saying a lot of people have this view, and let me pick on that. I think part of that reason is the media only talks to us about success stories. We look at the news, we look at social media, and we look at the $1 million capital raises, the $1 billion acquisitions, IPOs that happen out there. And even in I guess, business schools, we study case studies of what success was and what were the success factors. So I don't blame people in a way if they all have this, rosy view of entrepreneurship. My view is I need to create an awareness of the mental challenges specifically in that journey. And I bring this to the table through my own experience. And when I started my first startup, I was in a good job. I decided to take the plunge. I had financial backing, and I had a plan. And I had a good team. So I thought I'm going to build the next great thing.
This wasn't in Australia. You were at that point, right? You were either in India or Singapore, or where were you?
I was actually in Singapore, and I had a client project in London, and I was completely jet lagged. I was the only thing open at 3 in the morning was McDonald's. So I used to go into McCafe, and I purchased a book at Changi Airport that basically changed my life. So I was a management consultant. I was a partner at a consulting firm, but I'm an engineer by education. And so the book that I purchased was Steve Jobs' biography, and that was really powerful. The messaging in that was very inspiring and motivational for me to say, you know what, my core and my roots are in technology, and I want to go back and be in the technology field. And actually, in the book, Jobs, communicates through the book really effectively in that go do something, go build something of your own, make a dent in the universe. And I said, you know what, that's what inspired me to set up a company.
And from that point, you've had multiple ventures that have been successful. If you don't mind me asking on the well-being topic, so what was going through your mind as you were going through these new ventures? Like, personally, like, I can share for myself, like, when I did my MBA, which is it would be 15 years ago, for me, probably the reason it took me so long to do it was a fear of failure. And that could represent maybe some own insecurities, but after doing it, a whole new list of feelings and sensations I got. Like once I got over that initial fear, there were other things that came. So I was curious as to what was in your mind when you were going through some of this.
Like I said, I started off on a very, on a high, and we started building a product. It was well appreciated. We had initial clients. We even raised a round quite early on of funding. It actually got really hard about 4 years in. We weren't having the traction that we thought we would have. Capital was drying up, and we had to take some really difficult decisions on pivoting. And so that was probably the first time that I realized this is much harder than it looks. And one of my mission is to actually let people know that it gets hard. It gets really hard as you go through this journey. And I probably can't think of a single company, and Doug, you'll probably attest to this. It's a really hard journey to start something new, to build it, to nurture it, and to bring it to a point where other people in the world are thanking you for what you're doing, right? And so that journey is extremely difficult. So for me, that at that 4 year point, I was facing one of the lowest points in my life, and that was the first time I was undergoing real mental stress.
I believe it. It's a grind. It's a grind.
Yeah.
And for me, it came in phases. There's the
Yeah.
initial excitement of doing
Yes.
something new, right? And although, I think a lot of entrepreneurs of my listeners should know, like, you'll start something new, but be prepared. The critics will be there saying you're going to fail, or that's not new, or everybody has already has that. Then you go through, wow, the exhilaration of we are making a dent in the world.
Yes.
And then the fatigue starts to set in that, the long nights, to your point about resources, and then even I've seen it in my employees, but even myself, that sometimes remorse.
Yes.
That, hey, life was easier on the other side. So I think there's something real about that. And I'm glad that we're both sharing that, because I don't know that, like you said, some of us are in MBA school or in business, you're driven to be a success, and there's no crying and there's no whining and there's no feeling bad, right? Like, not true. Not true.
No, and what happened to me, and then I think I can reasonably generalize this, is 4 years in, you've told your family, you've told your friends, you've told people around you that you're building this great startup and everything's going great. And for some reason, founders, I'm oversimplifying here. We tend to create a picture that everything's fantastic. We tell our team it's all going to go great. We're telling investors, like, we're kicking goals. We're telling our clients we're expanding into other countries. And it's hard because you've kind of created this view that it's all fantastic. And by the time you realize that it is actually taking a toll on you, you don't know whom to open up to. You don't know whom to trust. You don't know whom to show you're vulnerable.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets very difficult. So my again, I want to build that awareness that everybody goes through this. It's a really difficult journey. You need to lean on people. You need to open up, and you need to reach out, because like with high performance athletes, like, they can't compete in Olympics without having coaches and mentors and dietitians.
Sure.
You need people around you to support you and make you successful on the journey. That's really important.
And I'm glad you brought up the point of family, because the transition into entrepreneurism, something that's underappreciated, is that your wife, your kids, your husband, they're going along for the ride whether they realize it or not. Not just the economic part, but like just the highs and lows of the startup journey. Now, the challenges of being a founder, the experience that I think you're correct that many of us tell a good story, but it may not necessarily reflect the reality of how we're feeling or what we're experiencing is really what you're trying to tackle with Founders Wellbeing. Could you tell us more about this problem that you're about to solve and what you're really trying to do with in a solution?
Yeah, I think of this as just moving the needle a little bit. I don't think, in this lifetime of mine I can solve this. This is such a huge problem. It's a global problem, right? And what's really interesting is there's very little talk about this. There's very little acknowledgement. But when I talk to individuals, be it founders, be it venture capitalists, they all accept that this is a problem. So I'm convinced that this is, and clearly I've lived through this, and
Yeah,
you and I have
you
spoken
can
about this
speak from
as well.
experience, right? Clearly.
Yeah. So the worst thing that affects me is when I read stories about founders committing suicide. I mean, I know it gets really hard. I've been through those dark moments, and I probably can attest that most, it's hard. It doesn't need to be that way. And so the number one thing is to build the awareness that everybody goes through this. It is quite normal. And just like you have physical issues with your body, you have a broken finger, you have headache, and you go and get that fixed, this is fixable. And people who live through this, they come out on the other side successful, and they go on to, build great things. For me, if I can build awareness, give people resources to self-educate and to understand what possibly is happening to them and how do I deal with this, I think would be fantastic.
I think it's a great solution that you're, first of all, starting with awareness, because
Yes.
when you look at, okay, here in the United States, our Small Business Association would say 99% of startups will fail over a 10-year period. And what
That's
that
right.
means is a lot of founders that took risks will fail. And as a result, I think there's this kind of, I see this, and I'm a huge boxing fan, so something I see there is that everyone's trying to be undefeated.
Yes.
And that's few and far between. When you actually look at the successful people out there, they have tried many times, a lot of times until they find the thing that takes off. And it leads to, feelings of maybe inadequacy, isolation, some get alienated. A guest that I talked with recently talked about the need to recycle entrepreneurs, that as they fail, there's lessons learned and that they have value, and that the community, it takes a village to hold them up and bring them up. And there's just, you're right, there's very few people, that's not a story that you hear about, right? Like you hear about the success, you hear about the high valuation, but you don't hear
Yes.
about some of these other things.
So it's almost inevitable that you will fall. And founders are sometimes considered as superheroes who break through brick walls, on an ongoing basis, and they crush challenges along the way. What I want to focus on is that when a founder breaks through a wall, and he or she is hurt, and that is actually emotionally hurt. They might be, psychologically hurt. Someone needs to help them pick themselves up, because by definition, founders are trying to create something that didn't exist, right? You're either building a new product or a new service, or you're trying to do something that's, faster, better, cheaper. So it fundamentally didn't exist, and you're trying to create something that is, reasonably unique, which means there is no playbook. And so you're trying to find your way. How is it that when there is no recipe for success that is guaranteed, there's no playbook, that you can expect somebody who has never been through that, or has done it, once or twice, to be able to do it without support? So that support is required, and people need to understand that it's a hard journey, and the founders need to acknowledge that I probably am undergoing high degrees of stress, or I'm undergoing a wave of depression, but it comes and goes in waves, like you said, right? And it happened to me as well. And so you just need to be aware of it. And I think that a large proportion of my work is in that the awareness and the advocacy that founders have well-being, challenges, and let's support them, because they are at the epicenter of what's being built. Yeah.
And if you don't mind me asking, in your opinion, do you feel that the pressures and the stress and the duress that founders face, do you also feel there's a component of like an expectation, either from investors or from their employees, to have this appearance of being impervious, and not have, like, like stop crying and whining that, to make payroll you had to not pay yourself, right? Like that, that's a common thing. Nobody wants to hear that, but that's a data point. It's a reality, right? Like, and that will weigh on founders. Like one thing that I think I know one thing that's underappreciated in a lot of the founders I work with. Like it's kind of like, when you were in your previous life and you're a W-2 employee, your credit rating is amazing. And then suddenly you become a founder, every time you fall short, you're kind of dipping in your credit card pool a little bit, right? You're dipping in your retirement, and suddenly you see, wow, a lot of founders and entrepreneurs, their credit ratings aren't phenomenal. I mean, brokers would say that, banks would say that. That's something that, to my listeners, I can tell you, when you go self-employment, just understand that traditional lenders look at you differently. So, in your opinion, Sandeep, do you feel there's this expectation out there that we have to just be resilient to all these things?
Yeah, yes. I can speak for myself. So I had that. I had an expectation of myself, and everybody wanted to hear a good news story. But what I also realized is that when you actually share what you're going through and how you are addressing it, your team supports you incredibly well. And that's the transition that every founder needs to learn to make, to open up, to be vulnerable, and to show, like, I'm trying my best. Here are the levers I'm pulling, and we're going to try and make it. Here's the plan. Do you have a better idea? Come on board. All hands on deck. Let's try and solve this together. But it's hard. It's really hard, and part of that is because at the beginning of the journey, the thing that everyone appreciates is you're going to give up a job, perhaps if you've had a job, and you're going to start a company. You're going to have a reduction in your financial remuneration. You're going to have long nights, and what people don't appreciate is that the mental stress that will build up over a period of time. And because you've not opened up for 4 years, then you're like, okay, I've not opened up for whatever it is, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Now should I open up, and will it mean that the dam's going to burst open and everything's going to fall? So it's about managing. So it's really about managing that expectation right from the beginning, that not only is it going to take a toll on me financially, maybe even physically, mentally, but also emotionally, right? So that I think that awareness isn't there, which will help people to open up along the journey to the right people. And obviously, you're not going to open up to everybody, but you need to understand, and you need to build that trusted relationship with people. And I can guarantee you, at least based on my experience, it works wonders when you have that trusted relationship.
Yeah, it's good points you share. I think the mental frame of reference of a founder is distinctly different than an employee, because see, an employee can resign. One day they could say, you know what, enough's enough. I'm going on a sabbatical. I'm out of here for a certain X amount of time. But a founder will have the stakes, whatever their investment they put in. They have the commitments, their reputation. So exiting and just dropping it is actually a very difficult thing. And for some of us, like especially myself, like your ego, your persona's wrapped up into what you're working on. So what I'd like to ask you, so in terms of generating awareness, what are your unique ideas what are the tactical approaches that you want to take to try to generate awareness? Because there's some really great ideas that I've heard from you that you're trying now to make people appreciate this.
Yeah, no, thank you. And you've been a great supporter of this initiative, so I really appreciate this. Thank you. It's always been a great pleasure working with you and your team, Doug. It's been it's a fascinating experience. One way for building the awareness is the podcast that we have launched. And we've called it the Gutsy Ones. It's people who make gutsy decisions, or people who are involved in other people's gutsy decision. Now, going back to your, just the previous point, I don't want our listeners to go away thinking that employees don't have mental stress. By no way we want to undermine that, right? So clearly, even
Completely agree.
staff, yeah, absolutely, they do have. It's just that the nature of risk that a founder takes, and like you said, it's almost like all eggs in one basket. So if you look at a VC, they have a portfolio approach. If you look at an employee, they have like, okay, I can always switch. But a founder is so invested in this from more than one dimension that it's at a different level. So having said that, um, the the podcast is aimed at talking to founders who have made gutsy decisions, and I'm looking at people coming onto the show and telling about not how great they are and how many walls they broke through, but opening up about what happened when they actually fell down. How did they feel, and what challenges did they go through, and how did they overcome? Because unlike say a headache where paracetamol can resolve it for a large proportion of the population, mental wellness is very different, right? So you might find running to be the way you de-stress. Someone might want to go for a hike. Others it might be swimming. It might be meditation. It might be yoga. Like, it's actually very different for different people. So the podcast is aimed at actually trying to get people to talk
You
about
should
what
you should
works
know
for
my
them.
outlet is gardening, by the way.
It's gardening. There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
Right?
I grow strawberries, like fruits and veggies and stuff, and like literally in this like monkey suit I'm wearing, I will go out and get it all dirty in my garden because it's my Zen moment. It's my thing.
It's your thing, but you have identified that as being the thing that helps you unwind or de-stress. And the mission of the podcast is to actually deliver that message to listeners that these people have all gone through the journey. They've come out, they've gone through those difficult moments, and here is their coping mechanism. So for some listener, it might be like, oh, yoga, yes, I love yoga and I need to do more of it. Or, they might be like, I actually like gardening, but I don't spend enough time, after listening to you. And so it's about being able to spread that message. And the other thing is I'm talking to people whom I call experts or coaches or mentors who work with founders. So they're not necessarily the ones who do the gutsy decision, but they work with people on a regular basis and watch them make these gutsy decisions and are part of that. And so I'm looking at getting people who have been through the journey or help others go through the journey, come onto the show and talk about this, because this, I think, is a great channel for us to use to drive the awareness that founders go through really difficult times and their teams go through difficult times. And here is what has worked for them. Yeah.
That's awesome. And from your experience, like I think the challenges that founders face, this is universal, right? Like
Yes.
it's not a like I'm here in Silicon Valley, you're there in Sydney, but this is actually one of the things that unites the entrepreneurial community and ecosystem is the pressures we face, in very much in a real sense, the risks we take, that there's a toll, and you said it best earlier, a toll on, first of all, the firm, the employees, the founders, and the investors. Like we're all under this kind of duress, and I agree that it's not necessarily talked about. One thing I'd like to share with my listeners that, it's also, if you want to deal with the burdens of entrepreneurism, deal with the burdens of, and also this is business leadership too. Like, so a lot of the entrepreneurs, you're going to deal with this. It's who you surround yourself with that can identify when you may be struggling and not realize it. Here's a good example. A close friend of mine is part of my firm, 3 Steps Forward, as Sandeep mentioned. Like he's worked with my company. And we're very much a family unit in that sense. But he brought it to my attention, not sleeping much, working a lot. He sees me on chat quite a bit. And he asked me this question. He said, hey, Doug, like, when was the last time you went out and did something? I said, I'd take my kids here, I'd take my wife here, and he said, no, I don't mean, I'm talking to you, Doug, not them. I'm talking about you. When's the last time you kind of did some R&R? And it literally came down, it was about 5 years from prior to starting
Wow.
3 Steps Forward. And well, 5 years from this date, which was still prior to 3 Steps Forward, that I went fishing with a friend of mine, Joe Marcus, and he said that's unacceptable. So we got a fishing charter boat. We went out. We caught some halibut in San Francisco Bay, and he forced me to play hooky one day from work. And and keep in mind, I mean, I own my business. I can go and do that, but I don't.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
And I shared this video clip on the chat for my employees of me catching a little baby shark. Cue the song, Baby Sharks. And it was interesting because a lot of the employees asked me about it, and they said, "Thank God, Doug. You finally took a break. Somebody finally made that happen." And I think that's probably my big lesson learned to a lot of the listeners, that who you surround yourself with, because they know you almost better than you know yourself and what your needs are. I don't know if you have similar experience with that, Sandeep, but that's just my personal experience.
Oh, absolutely. And again, I've had a very similar experience where I've been surrounded by people who cared for me and the family and the well-being. So in that sense, so I've been through waves of depression over the 10-year period that I've been an entrepreneur, and I learned recently that actually there is a sliding scale of depression, like from having weeks of depression to chronic depression. So it's like a sliding slope. And luckily, I caught a safety net somewhere, and then I came out of it. And so what helped me to do that was obviously the internal mechanisms that I have to deal with this, but also the people around me. I had some really fantastic mentors who spoke to me, who said, "Look, you know what? It's going to be fine. We've seen others go through this. You've just lost a key team member." And I was so depressed. I thought, this is it. Like, my head of engineering had said that he's going to move away from the company. But they said, "You know what, sleep over it." So something that has worked for me is I always go to bed. Like, if something's going wrong, I said, "You know what, tomorrow is another day." And that sleep really helps. You wake up in the morning, there's there's some fresh thoughts. And then you say,
You
"Yeah,
give it
actually, there's
24
another way
hours,
of
right?
dealing
You
with it."
give it 24 hours.
Yeah, 24 hours, exactly. But having that person tell me, just sleep over it. And she's been extremely supportive in my journey. And that made a big difference to to cope with these challenging situations.
I think you're bringing up a great point for my listeners to definitely. It doesn't matter how successful the entrepreneurial story, there's always strong mentors, sponsors,
Yes.
and with anything, this is like external parties that not only help you deal with the business decision making, but they help you deal with the personal weight or the dynamics of the situation you're in. And I've had them. You've
Yeah.
had them. It's really great that you mentioned that. Now, another thing, I know that you're working with, um, from your view, you're not necessarily a clinician or a
Yes.
psychologist or psychiatrist, right? Like you're attacking this from a business perspective. You're a business person. There's an ROI associated with the well-being of a founder, right? Like productivity will improve, like the culture, the environment, the retention. There's all these, benefits. But you're working with some other people. Maybe could you share with our listeners who kind of what you're doing on that front?
Absolutely. And I'm an engineer, and then I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a problem solver in a nutshell. Having been a consultant, I can structure these things quite well. But I do acknowledge I'm not the smartest person in the room, and actually don't want to. I want to be surrounded by people who are smarter than me in other areas that will never be my forte. And so I'm a certified mental health first aider. So one of the things I did before I started this was understand the fundamentals of the psychological elements. Like you said, I'm probably never going to become a psychiatrist, right? That's not me. What I'm now in a position to do is to understand the fundamentals of psychology and put it into the context of a startup scale-up environment. Right? I've been through one, now I'm trained on the other, and I'm bringing that together. And as an example, I had a senior exec member coming to me and saying, he was the head of software development, saying, I want to resign. And I'm like, why? He said, it's really hard for me. I'm managing everything from production releases to product roadmaps to managing the team. I can't take it anymore. And I was like, but that's such an easy problem to solve. You should have told me earlier. You know what? Just
Yeah.
take some time off. We'll recruit somebody to help you. But what it also meant was I was blinded to it. As a founder, I just
You
didn't
didn't pick
see
up on it.
somebody's.
Yeah, you couldn't pick up on it.
Yeah, because I never picked up on the fact that he was going through such stress and such a high degree of stress. And so,
Did you did you blame yourself? Did you blame yourself for this? Like deep down inside, I mean.
absolutely, I was like, how could I not see this coming? And oh my God, what would it was a combination of how could I not see this coming? Because I care for that person. I've known him for whatever 6 years plus, and he's been a really integral part of the journey. And how could I not see this? And what would happen if he actually left? So what can I do to? So it was like a firefighting mode, right? So now I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh my goodness, I need to do this. So what I'm now advocating is when you have stress, based on my own experience, I've distilled it down to there are four primary reasons why founders undergo stress. It's either related to team, or it's governance, where you haven't done something that it's a statutory requirement. And again, I'm guilty of not having focused enough on the admin stuff, on the governance stuff, and then when it comes to bite you, it really hurts. Or it is about go to market, it's about scaling, it's about pricing, it's about sales, it's about marketing, it's about positioning, or it's about capital, right? So one of these four things, they're the root cause, right? So there might be other things like finance or customer service, which is which does
Sandy,
cost.
if I had all four of those things,
Yeah,
smooth sailing, brother. Like I would be way less stressed, but you
pretty
never
much.
have all four at the same time, you know?
Exactly right. So it's one of these four. So and I have certain skills, but I'm not the best at all of these. So I'm looking to surround myself, and I've got a panel of what I call experts who are. I've worked with them and I trust them, and I've got them to help others. Because again, like I said, you need to reach out to people to resolve the problem that is affecting you. I'm not a big fan of taking founders on a yoga retreat for 2 days because if you're an employee, you go away, you come back, your inbox is full. You can spend 2 days, at a large company. At a large company, you can come back and you can spend 2 days just going through, sifting through emails, and everyone's fine with it, right? Whereas if you're a founder, you go away for 2 days and you come back, the problems have not gone. They're probably, increased. So the way I think about a founder's well-being is actually resolving the problem that they're facing at that point in time. And it could be a capital issue, it could be a marketing issue, And so reach out, find people who can help you. And if it's through us, so if, for example, if somebody wanted to enter the US market, I'd say, I know probably one of the best marketing companies in the US, talk to Doug and their team. And if it's about
Appreciate that
sales,
compliment
to
for
be
sure.
absolutely right, and I mean it. So, and if it's about sales, and I have other advisors. If it's if you want to get into the Asian market, I have So I'm building this panel of experts, including psychologists, to help founders globally to go through that journey. And that's basically what I'm trying to provide the resources to manage the problems.
This is great because I think for a lot of our listeners that are founders, if they fall into the characteristics we talked about, one, I don't think they even acknowledge that they probably are under stress or duress.
Correct.
Maybe someone close to them has made comments, like their wife or their friend,
Yeah.
like a close friend, like as is in my story. But I don't know if there's not a lot of aids, I would say, like there's no hotlines or if you don't have a mentor like that, then
Yeah.
I think it's great that you're taking this approach of bringing this panel of experts and this body that I hope later on you host a summit and other things to bring awareness out there. So if you don't mind, I want to ask you a personal question. I've always wanted this.
Sure.
So you are an international entrepreneur. Like you have worked, as we mentioned, Singapore, Australia. Did you feel any additional pressures going into a different culture than your own? Because keep in mind, in Bay Area where I live, we have a
Yeah.
lot of internationals that, they either immigrate, they become citizens, but then they do start successful businesses in the Bay. And that's not my culture, that's not my story. But I was curious for yourself, is there
Yeah.
any additional pressures or anxieties or challenges that you faced in doing that?
Um, Personally, I don't think I'd say I was at a disadvantage. I think one of the nice things about the startup world is there are some really interesting proof points that are, bigger than the individual. So if you have traction, no matter who you are, if you can take this to a team, like if you want to, let's say when I was actually recruiting in Singapore, a head of engineering, he was coming out of a big bank, and he really liked what we were doing. He didn't care who the founder was or who was, so obviously one of his friends was on the team. But what mattered was what we were doing. And the same thing with investors, right? So I don't know. And again, I can't speak to that. I don't think there's a bias. Performance and being able to showcase your traction, being able to show the problem that you're solving and being able to articulate it, quite well generally is good enough for you to make your way forward. And by definition, you shouldn't you shouldn't stop just because someone said a no. You're going to hear many no's in this journey. You just have to steel up and move forward. And maybe again, maybe I was blinded to it, but I just kept moving forward. So I don't think I was discriminated or I was at a disadvantage in any form or shape. Startup is very much a performance oriented business. Either you're doing something right and you can show it, and you're a good storyteller because you need to be able to tell that story in a very cohesive way, or you're not. You can't survive for a long time just on politics or kissing the right backs, and that just doesn't work.
Yeah, I'd say, you know, I appreciate you sharing. Like, something I can share, like for myself, as I mentioned, like I had entrepreneurial training for
Yes.
my MBA, but I didn't implement that for another 20 years. And one of my own personal insecurities was I felt as an African American man, having experienced the challenges in corporate,
Mm,
um, again, and I agree, performance oriented, there's all kinds of challenges. But
that's right.
I was afraid that the lenders, the banks, the gatekeepers, maybe they wouldn't be so open-minded to give me a chance. And um, let's just say I'm definitely, you know me, I'm a guy, I'm about competition. I definitely fall into
Yeah.
I'm not backing down from anybody. But I'm saying these are some of the anxieties that are in the back of your
Yes.
mind that actually burn capital or some of your energy that you're
Yes.
not able to give your whole self to the
Yeah.
cause that you're giving because you're thinking about these things. So I really like the fact that you mentioned solving the problem or the anxiety when it's there so you don't carry it forward and lose all this productivity.
Correct. And a very important lesson that I was taught very early on was that if you don't ask, the answer is always going to be no. If you ask, it might be a yes or a no. So in your case, like my point is, go out there and ask people, will you lend me money? Will you join my team? Will you buy my product? If you don't ask, the answer is always no, right? So there's no harm in actually going and asking because there's a chance that people might say, actually, yeah, that's interesting. But it's
Sure.
that fear of no that stops you from actually going out there. You just need to overcome that fear and anxiety.
So you had mentioned awareness that
Yes.
you have an innovative podcast. You've assembled a group of experts that can help a founder that
Yeah.
if you notice a problem, if they ask, which is a good point,
Yes.
right? That's a big if, right? That there are other solutions out there that they should entertain. Now, also, I'm assuming for yourself, but you are working on some content, correct? Like you
Yeah.
are thinking about, I'm sure, like ebooks or like lecture series, or you
Yes.
consult, even you spend your own time like on a one-on-one basis. So is that the direction you're also headed to help these founders?
Yeah, no, so a very interesting, excuse me, an interesting project that I'm working on is we've created a masterclass, and that's again part of the. It sits between awareness and resources. So this is not so the masterclass is a place where you can understand the different psychological challenges that one might experience, and we frame it in the context of a startup scale up environment, right? So we actually talk about this is how it would look for a head of sales, and here's what here's why somebody from marketing might not show up for a couple of days though they were doing some great work, and that's probably because they've just gone into that depression phase, right? So here's why your head of sales might be sweating because they just not they might not be meeting targets, but they may look very flustered, and that's because it's they might be having a panic attack or just about to. So how do you identify these things in a startup scale up environment? And we have come up with a framework that actually helps you to address it, because you just can't tell people, you know what, get on with it, come back tomorrow, and just
I mean, you could
or you
tell
can't
them,
have.
but it's not going to be motivating for it's more of a
That's right.
destructive management approach to do that.
Correct. And so for us, it's about providing people with a framework to approach this. So first of all, it might be self-awareness. It might be an awareness that somebody in your team or in your family might be undergoing this. It's also for the team members to understand that sometimes founders might act really silly, and that's because they might be going through one of these things, right?
Right.
So you need to appreciate this. It's a 360-degree view around and the same thing with investors. So we're working with investors to tell them, look, you've invested money in the startup because you're not backing necessarily an idea, you're backing the founder to make this thing happen. So you are also invested in their well-being, and here's a program that helps to improve the well-being of the founder and the team. So the masterclass it's a certified masterclass. So at the end of it, there's a test, and 80% is the cutoff, and then you get a certification. And what that does is it actually helps you to attract talent. I think you and I know that right now there's this massive war for talent, and what we're seeing
Absolutely.
is that yeah, and so what we're seeing is that being certified means you can attract the right talent that says, we understand how hard the journey is. We are a resilient company, and we are wellness certified in that we will approach this, proactively. And that's going to be a huge thing for founders, for executives within startups, and for people looking for jobs to be aware of this and knowing how to handle it, right? So obviously if someone's going through chronic depression, that isn't something we can handle. We might be able to point them in the right direction, but I think part of that awareness and resources coming together is the masterclass, which we're really excited about.
No, I think that's one of the most innovative approaches I have heard towards this business mental health challenge. Because as the founder and leader of my organization, one thing is for sure: like the Great Resignation is real. The
Yes.
the really talented individuals that deliver, you can't take them for granted. And I feel it having an accreditation, some type of certification for your organization that says my culture is positive, is constructive, and is built for longevity, because you know a, a certificate from Founders Wellbeing, it really could make a difference, I think, in a hire decision. And this is a lesson learned for all my listeners out there. You need to probably be thinking about how you can communicate that your culture is positive and constructive, and that you are a founder that even embraces these concepts, right? Because
That's right.
you're right. I mean, I'm sure my employees would have choice words about when I'm amped up about something and I'm saying we're going through the wall. And obviously you're going to hear like, well, is that a pursuit worth doing? Should you throw your resources at it? Hey, Doug, we're fatigued back here. And I just think that I kudos to you, Sandeep. I think that will be
Thank
high
you.
value add for a lot of people.
Absolutely. No, thank you. I really appreciate that.
So, Sandeep, I'm curious. Tell me about your vision of the future. How do you know when you've succeeded on this very important topic? Like, what is your measure of success here?
Look, I think it's an interesting question, and I may not have the precise answer, and I'll tell you why. When I when I ran my startups, it was very competitive. It was about who's my competition, what features do they have in their product, how can we be better, how can we get a client. Now I'm in a very different zone. It's all collaborative. So if there are another
Mm-hmm.
10,000 companies out there doing the same, I'd be more than happy,
Mm-hmm.
because the real mission is to help founders to get the support that they need. And for me, if I can start seeing, for example, I think tangibly, the media talking more about the journey, the media telling stories about the hardships of people. And if I can hear, even in my own life, people talking about, I'm having this issue, or you know what, I went through a few sessions with a psychologist, and it helped me a lot. Being able to hear that in 5, 10, 15 years' time, that it's okay to talk about this would be a really great achievement. So it's about helping the community to appreciate that there's nothing wrong with it, and there are so many avenues through which you can address it, and it's not all about being diagnosed as being, it's not a disorder in a way, it's just a phase, and it passes if you know how to manage it. So there's this really interesting concept of being, it's like waves, it's like, the dips, you will come up, but you just need to know what you need to do to come out of it, right? And that would be one way of looking at it.
Now, great to hear, Sandeep. So, for my listeners that would like to either reach out for your for your panel of experts, or to
Yeah,
listen to your podcast, or to even reach out to you, even as a friend, or
sure.
for networking in this very important topic, like how can they get in touch with you, Sandeep?
So absolutely. The podcast is available on all the sort of the major outlets. So it's on Apple, Amazon, Google, Spotify, and the likes. So get onto it, and then I think it's so fascinating to listen to people's journey and their vulnerable moments and how they came out of it. I think it's really interesting.
And I'm going to be on the gutsy ones, right? Like I'm
And you are,
definitely
of
gonna,
course.
I'm gonna jump on there with you. I think we'll have some great conversations. I got some more stories to share for sure.
Absolutely, and I'm really looking forward to that one too. The masterclass is a really good avenue to to understand the psychological elements, and then the framework and how do you address this and what resources are available, along with the certification. And just contact me, get onto the website. There's a contact form. You can then say I want to talk to an expert from the panel of experts we have, or just drop me an email. The thing that I really want people to understand is, we are here as a company for any founder out there. It might be tech founder, it might be non-tech, it might be someone who's got a travel company, a mortgage broking. They're all founders for me, and they all have stress, they all have challenges to deal with, and you should never feel like there's no one out there that you can reach out to. So we want to be at least that entity that's recognized as being there for every founder in the world. I know for a fact that there's mental health challenges for frontline staff, for sports people. It's there in many different in many different professions. But I can speak as a founder, and I can relate to them, and they can relate to me. And so the team and I, so we are actually working on specifically helping entrepreneurs and founders, business owners, to deal with the difficult decisions that they may have to go through. So reach out, absolutely. I think reach out is the number one message that I'd like to, to put out into the universe, if you will. You will never go wrong when you reach out to the right people. It's only going to help you.
Well, thank you, Sandeep, for building bridges. I want to move to my closing comments to my listeners of Twist of Fate. As you can see here, this is a very important topic, because if you're a business owner, entrepreneur, or small, working in the area of creating change, Good things happen when you give your 100% authentic self at all times. A lot of the barriers that prevent you from doing it is exactly what Sandeep is crusading to fight, which is a lot of the fear, the anxiety, some of the mental negativity, even some of the tolls may feel overwhelming. And the understanding that it's a phase, that there's help, that there's resources, and even bringing kind of innovation to the mental health space, to finding your own well-being and the well-being of your organization. It's a priority for the investors, the employees, and the founders. So I hope this episode gives some unique context as to why we're all important to each other, and that why the culture of your organization and the foundation of your organization needs to be built on keyword well-being. With that, I really hope you enjoy this episode of Twist of Fate. You can check it out on all platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You can subscribe, like, or share on YouTube. And I look forward to sharing another episode of Twist of Fate with you in the future. Bye-bye.
Twist of Fate is hosted by Doug Younger. It's produced by John Lundvid and Matthew Brown at Ezo Creative. Moni Yu designs our graphics, and Enrique Pimentel manages our digital life. Our theme music is by Jamie Bathgate. Special thanks to all of our patrons. You can support the show by visiting patreon.com/twistoffate podcast. Thanks for listening.